My guest this week is a friend, a chess icon here in New York. He's basically to chess in New York what Billy Joel is to music in New York. He is often referred to as the Iron Man of chess because he is one of the most active tournament players ever, sometimes having played over 700 games in 1 year. I am, of course, referring to International Master Jay Bonin. Jay is basically the mayor of the New York chess scene. Whether you're an amateur or pro, if you're based in New York, you know Jay in some capacity. We used to talk quite a bit at the Queen's Chess Club before the rounds would begin. I've played Jay a few times. If you're interested, I put a link for one of our games in the show notes from back in the day. Right now, Jay is not active over the board, but he does want to get back to it at some point. I know he has a lot of fans who are curious about what he's been up to lately. Jay wanted me to let you know that he's okay and he's currently residing at a care facility right here on Long Island. He does play on chess.com all the time. His handle is Bonin Nights. We spoke recently about his chess career and his approach to the game. His 2016 book, Active Pieces, is excellent. There's a link in the show notes. Each chapter focuses on a specific aspect of his style with introductory prose followed by his annotated games. It's a fun book, very well written and very accessible. I like that the annotations are more than just technical. They also explain his thought process and reasoning. My conversation with Jay is coming up. We spoke via phone. Stick around.
Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neal Bonin.
So Jay, how you doing? It's Neal Bonin from the Long Island Chess Club. It's been a while. Thanks for being on the podcast. Good to have you. I appreciate you taking the time to talk.
You're very welcome.
So you have been called the Iron Man of chess because you've played in so many tournaments. You're one of the most active tournament players in the history of the game. And I know you started during the Fischer era. So yeah, can you tell us about that, what that experience was like?
Yeah, Bobby Fischer was a great inspiration for me. I remember I was working as a camp counselor in Manhattan Beach, Brooklyn back in 72, and I was in the recreation room there, and the TV was on, and Shelby Lyman was, analyzing the games, and I already knew how to move the pieces, so it just caught my eye, and I was hooked right away. I started looking for clubs to go to and I, was playing games with neighbors up the block. There was one nice neighbor I called him Mr. Jack. His full name was Jack Frankfurt. And I used to play him a bunch of games, and he gave me a book as a gift, Soviet School of Chess by Auerbach and Yudovich. And he inscribed it, and he wrote in it to the chess champion of East 22nd Street, who has all the makings of a future master. Well, he never lived to see his prediction come true, unfortunately.
That's a very nice story.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I lost the book because I got rousted from an apartment by a roommate that kind of went off her meds and stuff, and I left a lot of stuff behind. And that book was one of the things I left behind. That kind of broke my heart. I never got that back. So, but still, it was a nice memory. Yeah. So, so I was hooked. But believe it or not, I didn't discover tournaments until like nearly 6 months later. It was December of 1972.
Okay. Now, Jay, can I ask you about your days in the 80s at the Chess Center of New York?
Oh, yeah, that's how I started my legacy. Prior to that, I was playing in Bill Goichberg tournaments at the Hotel McAlpin and at the Roosevelt, and every couple of weeks. And there was a Thursday night tournament at the Marshall Chess Club, and which is still going on. That tournament has really withstood the test of time. That was pretty much it. I played in a couple other random tournaments. There was a tournament out in Queens somewhere. I think it was my third tournament. It was in a church. And, other than that, I wasn't active. But in 1980, when Bill Goichberg opened up the Chess Center, that's when I really started pouring it on, because he ran tournaments every day, pretty much. It was incredible. You couldn't get enough chess there. I mean, there were stretches where I was playing in 3 tournaments simultaneously, even.
And that's where you really cut your teeth, right?
Yeah, that's how I started my legacy, was at the Chess Center. And in 1982, Andy Soltis wrote a nice article about me and Leslie Braun. You probably remember Leslie Braun, or was he before your time?
Shelby Lyman, I remember. I heard of.
But not Leslie Braun. I mean, Leslie Braun was another active player, and we sort of shared the spotlight back in 1982, but then I way surpassed him.
I want to ask you about your study regimen when you were younger, like when you were like 17, 20, like when you were younger.
Oh, yeah, that was fun. All the different stuff I looked at, you probably no longer see. I read Reuben Fine's Endgame book, which is a classic.
The word on the street, so to speak, is that you never really had one of those like formulaic study plans. You would just kind of look at games and...
No, I was just random. I mean, I read Reuben Fine's Endgame book. I mean, I read Nimzovich's My System. That was actually one of the first books I bought, aside from that Yudovich book, which was gifted to me, was The Praxis of My System. I sort of got it backwards. I didn't realize that it was another book before that, but I ended up getting a collection of Nimzovich's games, and I studied that. And I had Irving Chernev's Logical Chess Move by Move. That's another one of my early reads.
Sure.
And also the opening book that was popular at the time was Al Horowitz.
Now, what about the chess informant books? Because those were very big for you, right?
Yes, I read a lot of those. Late 70s, early 80s. I have one chess informant here that was gifted to me, one of the recent ones. I can't believe how much it changed. But, I've been a bad boy. I spent a lot of time playing and very little time studying,
Jay, you are clearly, most people know this, one of the most active tournament players.
I probably played between 30 and 40,000. Just played an insane number. I mean, I was averaging anywhere from 500 to 700 games a year.
And how did you manage that?
I don't know, because for a stretch of time, I was also working a day job. So, for many years, I worked for a law firm for like 16 years, from 1982 to 1998. I worked for a law firm. I had a simple job. I was a mailroom clerk. So I would do my job, and then when the job let out, I would run over to one of the chess clubs, usually the Marshall Chess Club, but there was also the Manhattan Chess Club, and I would do whatever evening tournament they would have there. So I really didn't, get too much of a day off, because I would also play on the weekends. So I was pretty much nonstop.
And how did you manage that? I mean, as far as your energy level and your just...
Yeah, I'm amazed where I just got the energy to keep going, and, unfortunately it's been a year since I've done it, but
You're fully retired from active play now, correct?
Well, until I get out of here and, have this... I want to get an operation to reverse the colostomy.
Okay.
And, I could probably function with it until I get it and attempt to go places. But, in the meantime, I'm here because I got other issues.
You'd like to play over the board again if you could?
Yeah, I want to go back. I can't wait to go back. And all my fans miss me. They're dying to see me back. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them comes in a nursing home and kidnaps me or something. Jay, I want you in this tournament. Believe me, I want to get back, and I miss all my fans out there, and much love to you all.
Yeah. Now, are you playing online a lot now or no?
Oh, yes, nonstop. I mean, that's pretty much it for now. I go on chess.com and I play like nonstop. And, of course, I take breaks to go on Facebook or check my email or whatever random sites I go on. But, that's pretty much it.
I remember we used to hang a little bit. We played at the Queen's Chess Club. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, yeah, I played you a couple of times. You even got a draw.
I did get a draw against you. I did.
You got one draw.
I'll take it. I got a draw against the Bonin.
So tell your grandchildren you drew the Iron Man.
So no, those were good days because the Queen's Chess Club. I was kind of. I mean, I was up and coming as an adult improver. I was in my like 20s then, but I was, I guess, an adult improver up and coming.
Yeah, and it was in that nursing home which I met. That was a good place, that nursing home, and then they moved it to this church in Queens.
So Jay, back in the day, you mentioned before that there's one funny story you remember.
Oh yeah. It was in 1991, and it was a few days after I got mugged. I got mugged in a subway, and I had stitches because I made the mistake of trying to resist my attackers, and one of them took a box cutter to me. So I spent the night in the emergency room. In fact, that was probably the last time I was in the hospital prior to my, latest mishap. So I got stitches and all that, and so I have a bandage on my head, and I show up at this tournament at the Marshall. It's Halloween, and I have a bandage on my head, and one of the prizes in the special Halloween tournament, it was run by Steve Emmett, was, a prize for best costume. Well, guess who won that prize? And by default, because I don't think anybody else wore a costume of note, so I got the prize, so that was kind of funny.
That's crazy. What about any like crazy games, any situations like with other players?
I had a situation where I did two tournaments, one after the other. I went to the Manhattan Chess Club. I played my first round game and I lost, so I dropped out and I grabbed the cab and I went to the Marshall just in time to enter round two with a half-point bye, and I tied for first in that tournament. That's another funny story. I lose in one tournament and I end up tying for first in the other, and I was late for the second round, I used to do crazy things like that.
Any interesting opponents, like any like crazy or wild opponents that like they tried something against you or they acted a certain way?
Well, Kamran Shirazi, I don't know if you've heard of Kamran Shirazi. He was an IM. He was originally from Iran, and he lived in New York for a while, but now he lives in France. He had a wild style. He was like a romantic player, and he always gave me fits, and I really dreaded playing him. There were others, one player that made me nervous, but I would overcome him was Lev Zilbermans. I would manage to get by with him. And
I want to talk about Active Pieces, your book.
Oh, sure, yeah.
If I can just give my own opinion, I happen to like this book because just, as an amateur player, it's very beautiful in its simplicity.
Yeah, I like to keep it simple. There's no computer analysis. This is from my own blood and guts appraisal of the position, and I don't give too many variations. I just get general appraisals, and people can relate to that.
That's what I like about it, because there's no variations. It's just the moves that were played.
Yeah, I keep it simple.
Yeah, and it's more about your thought process. It's almost like a stream of consciousness thing. It's not like, well, I moved the bishop here because it's not just technical. It's more like, I wanted to make my opponent nervous here, or I wanted to go for an attack.
Yeah, that was part of my shtick, trying to steer the game into channels that might make my opponent uncomfortable. And usually it comes from having played that person over and over again. And each time I play that person, I pick up a few things. So I try to make adjustments, and, I kind of learn, this guy doesn't play endgames very well. So I would trade queens and stuff. And, I would do things like play Larson's opening against people that like to fianchetto their king bishop. So I would, get a jump on them.
Now, you feel tournament players are not very good at endgames, correct?
Yeah, especially children. When I play young players, children or teenagers, I would always try to steer the game into an end game because they may not have a lot of experience playing the ending.
And you like grinding out those even positions.
Yes, I'm a grinder. Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because that's something that interests me. I think a lot of the listeners, because you hear a lot of the talk now is about aggressive play and attacking, but talk to me about the grinding, like how you did it, what your thought process was.
Yeah, I'm a positional player. I usually try to do things like give my opponents double pawns, and I like knights, so I would everybody knows that I like knights, and I would try to get a position where I have the two knights and keep it solid, and sort of a pattern. I would try to stick with the pattern, and if you have a pattern, it's easy to find the moves too because you have an overall plan that you try to stick with, and so it definitely saves time. I always manage my time well on the clock because I kind of knew what I wanted to do.
Yeah, now tell me about the so-called Bonin knights, because you do favor knights. They know that about you, so they would try to trade your knights off. Like, how would you handle that?
Oh yeah, Larry Tamarkin was notorious for that. May he rest in peace. He would, try to, in my knights and trade them off and leave me with bishops. But I sort of have a line for that. I would say, well, I'm pretty good with my bishops too. To quote a New York Times article that was written about me back in 1995. Yeah, I mean, I'm adaptable. That's the thing. You got to be adaptable. Because you're not always going to get what you want. So you got to be ready to, switch gears and just you're given what you got, and you got to make good with it.
You enjoy, though, the queenless middle games. You would always try to aim for that, right?
Oh, yeah, that's another thing. The queenless middle game. For example, if somebody plays the King's Indian against me, the classical line, I would take on e5 and trade queens on d8 and bishop g5. And, that would frustrate the hell out of some of these players because they want to attack me. They want to roll up their kingside pawns, But I have to confess that recently I've been experimenting with castling instead and allowing knight c6, d5, knight e7, and I would, play the bayonet attack with b4. And I had a stretch where I was doing that. I've experimented with other lines as well. My main thing, was the exchange variation, and I've done very well with it. It was sort of my bread and butter opening variation. I'll play the Sicilian or the French, but recently I've been experimenting with e5 or going into symmetrical king pawns, but it's frustrating because I get a lot of bishop c4s, and I'd rather play against the Ruy Lopez, so if you're listening out there, make notes. If you ever get to play me again, put your bishop on c4. I'm just giving it away,
So in other words, everyone's going into like the Italian game instead of a Ruy Lopez?
Yeah, I get a lot of that, or a Scotch game. Scotch game I can handle, but bishop c4 stuff, that's really not my cup of tea. But still, it's good to try different things. I mean, I pretty much tried everything. The Alekhines defense even.
But you're comfortable. So in other words, it's not. Yeah, it's you'll vary your opening.
I play the Nimzovich defense with knight c6. I've done that too. Pretty much tried it all.
Now tell me a little bit about the rope-a-dope, right? The chess rope-a-dope. What's that all about?
Well, it's very, similar to, just giving your opponent a false sense of security. And, like when they try to attack me especially, that's the rope-a-dope. I would play solid and they would try to attack me and then I would unleash.
Yeah, you would find holes in their plan and basically pounce on it, right?
Yeah, it's like they would throw the kitchen sink at me, because it seems I'm playing passively, and I would end up being Joe Solid and just not playing from there.
And what about draw offers? Like back then compared to now, like what's your attitude on draw offers? Because,
well, of course, if I don't like my game, I'll offer a draw, and usually I'll do it while making a capture. That's a good time to offer a draw while capturing something. So you don't give your opponent much choice.
You mentioned that in the book. So in other words, the thought is you capture the piece and then you offer the draw, and what, he's more likely to take it, you think?
Yeah, because, otherwise, they got to refuse by making the obvious capture, or it's assuming there's no other moves on here and, in between moves and stuff. But I get a lot of acceptances because I am who I am and they respect me. I sort of play on that and I get away with murder, Yeah, in fact, a lot of the games in that chapter, I'm worse, and I really get away with murder. I mean, there was one game I offered a draw, and I was really in bad shape. I don't remember. I don't remember who it was.
Now, coming up back in the day, because he wrote a forward of your book. Tell me about your relationship with Asa Hoffman and what that was like.
Well, I've known Asa for a long time, I think as far back as 1973, and I sort of consider him my de facto mentor. I mean, I picked up a lot of stuff from him. I love his style because he plays offbeat openings as well, and I picked up a few things from him, like the O'Kelly Sicilian. That's with A6 on move 2, and I played the check Benoni, and I've also adapted systems where you play D6, C6, and Bishop G4, and things like that. I even kind of modified something. I created something of my own. I call it the Bonin Khan. It's a delayed Carol Can, where you play C6 on move 1, and then A6 on move 2. And I sort of hold back D5 for a bit, wait and see what my opponent does. And that throws some people off. I would end up gaining time on the clock because they'd never seen that before. And so it's a good psychological ploy. But Asa would do that himself. He would just use a different move order. He would play D6 and C6, and he would play A6 later. So sometimes it could be a transposition. Yeah, anyway, Asa was definitely an inspiration to me, and I've known him a long time. And we talk on the phone occasionally. Yeah, I respect Asa a lot, and especially what he's gone through, and he came out okay. I'm really proud of him.
How much online chess are you playing now?
A lot.
So now what kind of time controls are you playing online? Are you just doing like 5-minute games or longer, shorter?
Yeah, right now I'm doing 5. I mean, I was doing others. I was doing 3 minutes straight, and I would also do 3-2, but now I do 5. And, I should probably switch it up and go back to 3-2 just to play a different set of opponents. But at the 5-minute time control, I get to play games with Asa as well. So, we're still battling at it, and we chat a bit.
So let me jump back to when you were playing in tournaments, like when you were doing like 500, 600, 700 games a year. Do you ever look back and say, I know you enjoyed it, but do you ever sometimes wonder like maybe that was too much or?
Yeah, sometimes I think that was too much and maybe I could have been doing other things. But yeah, I kind of had a bohemian lifestyle, I mean, there'll be work, there'll be play, and then making a stop at the bar for a couple of beers. And
yeah, but you loved it though, right? You loved it.
I loved it. I kind of, was independent,
As far as how people play, has it changed or is it the same? Like, how would you describe how the game has evolved, let's say from the 70s until now?
Yeah, I mean, the top players, they play solidly, and I think back in the day, they also played solidly, guys like Ulf Andersson or, Tigran Petrosian, they had solid styles. So, the top players in the world, they seem to play solidly. I mean, they play a lot of symmetrical openings, symmetrical queen pawn, symmetrical king pawn. They believe in equal space, they don't want to concede a space advantage. I mean, what I don't understand is why some of these players love the Berlin defense to the Ruy Lopez. I personally despise it. And I don't know how they could stomach that, but they do it,
What do you think of like all the system openings now, like the London system and the Kali and the Tory?
Yeah, and the Jobava, I've been getting online. I'm getting a lot of these early H4 moves. They would play Bishop F4 and then Bishop E2, and then they'd run their H pawn up, and that kind of gives me fits.
Well, when they play H4, how do you usually respond?
Well, I usually play H5.
You do play H5, okay.
If I can, rather than allow them to play H5. That's annoying, and I've been getting a lot of that. I mean, you can thank Magnus Carlsen for that. Everybody plays follow the leader. Everybody wants to play what the world champion plays, so... Well, I want to play what I want to play. When I'm white, I put my bishop on G5. I don't put it on F4. Although I did have one game. I think it was against Alex Ostrovsky where I didn't want to face his Queen's Gambit accepted, so I put the bishop on F4 and managed to make a draw. So that was a good choice.
Well, you'll also play like another like signature Bonin thing. You'll go D4 and then Bishop G5 on move 2, right?
Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, D4, D5, Bishop G5. But recently I've been having problems because a lot of people play F6, and I should start doing that myself when people play Bishop G5 against me. I usually don't play D5 much. I play Knight F6 on move 1 against D4. So, but I've had instances where I have played D5 and. On Bishop G5, I would play the more solid. I would play C6, Bishop F5, Knight on B to D7, and Knight F6. That's a good, reliable way to play it. But F6 seems to be sharper, and you got to go back to F4. If you go to H4, then you got to worry about Knight H6. I think I have a game in my book against Timothy Taylor where I allowed Knight H6 and Knight F5, and somehow I won that game. But it was a tough position.
One thing I noticed about you, Jay, I mean, it's been a while since, like we hung out at the Queen's Club, but you're very composed, like I don't want to say under pressure, but even if your position might be worse or it's unclear, you just manage to stay calm and you don't get like rattled. Is that something you worked on, or?
I try to stay calm, but I could get rattled. I've had opponents that rattled me a bit. I won't go into details, but most of the time I'm calm. I have plenty of time on my clock, and I got the kind of game I want. So
yeah. So clock management.
That's important. Yeah, that's important. You want to be comfortable. That's part of the game. And a lot of people don't understand. You're playing the player and not just the board.
So if a player said to you, Mr. Bonin, I constantly have a problem with clock management, like what advice would you give him?
Try to make your opening moves very quickly, usually in the first 5 minutes. And, you should have a set group of lines that you could rattle out moves. And, especially in an action game where you only have 30 minutes to play the game, you definitely want to manage your time in those. So you should rattle out the moves quickly. Definitely have a few opening systems that make you feel comfortable. And, so this way you'll have more time for the rest of the game.
Like they say, you should learn the bishop and knight mate. Like that's important. Do you agree with that?
Believe it or not, I never learned it, and I had I had that against a guy named Gary Huang, and I couldn't win it, and I felt terrible, and I really should have learned it, but I mean, one game in like almost 40,000, I get the bishop and knight, and I don't know how to do it. I'm not alone. There were a couple other people that didn't know how to do it either. I think Mark Ginsburg and IM, he failed to do it once. And also Boris Privman, may he rest in peace, he couldn't do it. And then this is in a tournament out in New Jersey. And luckily, I was on the tail end where I had the king and my opponent had the bishop and knight. And they didn't know how to do it, but some people did know how to do it. I know a player, you probably know him too, Nick Panico.
Yep.
He voluntarily goes for the bishop and knight, gets rid of all his pawns because he knows how to mate with a bishop and knight. And so that's how confident.
He practices that for fun.
Yeah, and he does, and he'll even give away all his pawns just to leave him with the bishop and knight. And that's confidence for you. I guess I should have done the same, but I never get it, so I never bother to practice it.
Yeah, I mean, some people will go their whole chess career and never see it.
Yeah, well, I was almost there, but I finally got one. This was a few years ago in an action tournament.
Back in the day, Jay, did you play in Washington Square Park a lot?
Believe it or not, I played there a lot during the pandemic because there was nothing else to play in. There was a guy named Anthony Kozakowski, and he thought of the bright idea of organizing these park tournaments. And so there was a stretch of time where I was going to Washington Square Park a couple of times a week back in 2020, playing these tournaments. And it was great, but I would have to play in the elements because sometimes it would rain, and I would have to play through the noise because you had a lot of these hustlers, and sometimes there would be drug dealers or whatever, or some other random types, and they would make noise, and I couldn't tell them to be quiet, because you're not in a private chess club. You're out in the park. So you got to deal with it. And also, when it gets dark, you got to they supplied lights, so it was really survival. And it was fun for a while. So as for a long time ago, I remember going to Washington Square Park, I think sometime in the 70s, and I think I played a guy checkers, not chess so much, but I think I also played in the 80s or 90s for a bit. I even gave a time spot to one of the regulars there and managed to hold my own, crazy things like that, but, otherwise, it was tough playing in the park. I mean, if you wanted to play a Skittles game, it wasn't always easy because the players played in cliques and stuff. And I was more of a chess club guy. There was a stretch of time where I was playing in Bryant Park as well. I mean, like maybe a decade ago, I was going to Bryant Park. That was sort of nice to play there. And I don't think I ever played in Union Square Park. I mean, I'm more of a club player than a park player.
Okay, I'm the same way. So let's jump back to your book, Active Pieces. I do have a few questions about it. By the way, for those of you listening, I do recommend it. It's called Active Pieces, Practical Advice from America's Most Relentless Tournament Player. Great book, very simple layout, very clear. A lot of games, just some great explanations. And the annotations, as I said before, they're very thematic. It's a lot of thought process, not so much, this move was made just to cover this square. It's not just technical. It's more, as Jay said earlier, it's more emotional. It's more thinking about the position and your opponent and the type of person your opponent is. Highly recommend it. So, Jay, it was co-authored with Greg Keener.
Yeah, Gregory Keener.
So tell me about that.
He came to me with the idea back in 2015, and I knew that he just co-wrote a book with Asa Hoffman on the Czech Benoni. If he didn't do that, I probably would have declined to write it, but, I was inspired by that, so I figured, well, why not? And people were bugging me to write a book, especially after Asa's book came out. People would come to me and ask, so when are you going to write a book? So, well, chess fans, you finally got your book. Gregory came to me and, he sort of laid out a plan. And I kind of stuck to it. I had to go through some databases and pull out the games that were relevant to the themes that he wanted. And that wasn't easy, but I did it. My only regret was not finding too many games from a very long time ago because I did not save my score sheets. I mean, there were maybe only a few games in there going back to the 70s, one of them against Larry Christensen.
I was going to ask you about that. That was actually my next question.
Yeah, I kind of regret that. It would have been nice to see, earlier games, but unfortunately they were not available, so that's my bad.
Now, how come you threw them out?
Yeah, after a while I would, and I no place to put them, and a bunch of them I kept in the Manhattan Chess Club in the basement when I worked there as a manager, and they ended up getting thrown out, and I never claimed them when we relocated to the New Yorker hotel, so they kind of got lost in the sauce. I kind of kept a lot of them in manila envelopes and
One couple more things, Jay. I don't want to keep you too long, but I want to ask you about the chapter on beating grandmasters, because there are some great games in here. Are there any games, or is there any particular game or win against a grandmaster that stands out to you?
Well, there's a couple. I mean, one of them was my first grandmaster back in 1982 on my birthday, no less. I beat none other than Sammy Reshevsky. The man was one of the best chess players of his time. He wasn't a great personality. If you go over the game, you'll notice that I checkmated him because he wouldn't resign. He was sort of a bad sport, and I've heard stories about that from other people, that he was kind of a sore loser, and this was no exception. But I tell you, after the game, I was like a kid in the candy store. I was like running around telling people what I did, and I was so excited, and it was Sammy Reshevsky. It wasn't just any grandmaster, and it was on my birthday. I mean, you can't ask for better than that, and so that stands out. And another game in the 1986 World Open, I played a grandmaster named Stefan Duric, and I probably unleashed one of my best combinations. I sacrificed one piece, and then I made a quiet move, and I ended up sacrificing a rook on e7. You couldn't take the rook either way, but you had to, or else you get mated. And so I was proud of that game. So that kind of stood out, and there are others.
As far as what you're thinking about sacrificing pieces, like, would you look to do that, or you would only do it if the position called for it?
Oh yeah, if the opportunity's there, I would sacrifice something.
But you enjoyed it. Like, did you enjoy playing, let's say, like speculative sacrifices where you didn't see it all the way through to the end?
Yeah, I think there were instances where I would go by feeling and not calculate, but that wasn't really my style. But sometimes the opportunity comes up and you got to deviate from your plan. Those slower moves might not be good enough. So, that's why you sacrifice. Sort of a time thing. And it works sometimes. And I must have games in there where I sacrifice. But, actually I have a nice game against Tatiana Weiserberg, where I think I sacrificed my queen. I ended up getting it back a few moves later by promoting a pawn. But I was competitive that game.
All right. So I have one last question for you. What would you say is the biggest flaw that you see when you play amateur players, let's say like Class A players, 17, 18, 1900, or even when you were playing over the board? What's the biggest flaw that they have? Is it not seeing threats? Is it a tactical thing? Is it end games? What would you say the biggest problem is?
Well, it could be a combination of things, probably everything you said. They're just not as deep. They're not as deep strategically, so, they can, it could be a combination of things, definitely.
So, Jay, I don't want to keep you too long. I really appreciate you being on the podcast, Jay. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I mean, I guess I got to be a part of the scene because you kind of caught all the other Long Island players out there, so it doesn't make any sense that I should be left out.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're an institution in New York chess, so I had to have you on at some point. Well, hopefully you'll be back playing over the board.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
I'm not trying to make this about me. I'm surprised you remembered that I drew you.
Oh, yeah. I remember.
Yeah, I guess you probably remember all your games, right? To some degree, I guess, right?
I get a lot of compliments from people, like they were so glad to get a chance to play me, and I would get a lot of friend requests after the games, But I don't always answer them all, but if they say something nice, I'm more likely to bite. But yeah, I'm usually just there to play, All right, Neal, thank you.